Montana Territory, 1878. The wind howled across the rugged landscape, sweeping dust clouds over the small town of Silver Creek like nature's own curtain, periodically hiding the harsh realities of frontier life. In this unforgiving terrain, 25-year-old Zachary Elkins had built his existence on one immutable truth: a man survived the West alone or not at all. Zach adjusted his worn Stetson as he surveyed the town from atop his chestnut gelding, Copper. 6 years of ranching, fighting, and surviving had hardened him into the man he was now. Respected, feared perhaps, but fundamentally solitary. The jagged scar running along his jawline served as a permanent reminder of the night he'd learned that lesson, when trusting the wrong partner had nearly cost him his life and did cost him his family's small ranch in Wyoming. Attachments are just weaknesses waiting to be exploited, he muttered to his horse, the only companion he permitted himself these days. Copper snorted in response, as if disagreeing with his master's philosophy. Silver Creek appeared before him. A dozen buildings stretched along a dusty main street, with the Frontier Hotel standing tallest among them. His business was simple: sell his small herd of cattle, purchase supplies, and return to his modest homestead 30 miles north. In and out. No complications. No connections. Yet something inexplicable had drawn him to this particular town rather than the larger trading post to the east. Perhaps it was mere chance. Perhaps it was destiny. Zach would have scoffed at such notions. A man made his own way in the world, carved his own path through determination and grit. Fate was a luxury belief for those who hadn't seen the brutality of the frontier. What he truly wanted was straightforward: enough money to expand his small ranch, enough reputation to keep trouble at bay, and enough solitude to prevent the pain that inevitably came with human connection. Yet in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, when the coyotes howled across the plains, a hollow ache resided in his chest, one that extra acres or additional cattle couldn't seem to fill. As he rode into town, eyes followed him. A stranger always attracted attention in places like Silver Creek. Zach kept his gaze straight ahead, his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that the less people knew about you, the fewer problems you invited. New face in town. Observed the livery stable owner as Zach dismounted. The man was gray-bearded and weathered, probably in his 60s. Name's Peterson. I'll take good care of your horse. Appreciate it, Zach replied, his voice low and measured as he handed over a coin. Just passing through for supplies and business. How's the Silver Creek Hotel? Clean enough. Better than sleeping with the snakes, Peterson chuckled. Though you might want to hurry if you're looking for a room. Town's busier than usual with the Harvest Festival tomorrow. Zach nodded his thanks and collected his saddlebags. A festival was the last thing he wanted. Too many people, too much noise, too many opportunities for trouble. He'd conclude his business quickly and be gone by morning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as he made his way toward the hotel. That's when he heard it. A sharp cry followed by angry male voices from the alley beside the general store. Zach hesitated. Whatever trouble brewed, there wasn't his concern. He'd learned the hard cost of involving himself in others' problems. Let go of me. A woman's voice, clear and defiant despite its evident fear. Zach's steps slowed. He glanced around, noting several townspeople deliberately averting their eyes from the alley's direction. His jaw tightened. Keep walking, he told himself. Not your fight. Instead, his hand moved to the revolver at his hip as he turned toward the alley. 3 men had cornered a young woman against the rough wooden wall of the store. One gripped her wrist while another pawed at her handbag. The third, larger than the others and sporting a dirty beard, leered at her with unmistakable intent. Now, Miss Riley, your pa's debt ain't gonna pay itself, the large man was saying. We've been more than patient. My father's illness took everything we had, the woman replied, her chin raised despite her precarious position. The doctor from Helena is arriving tomorrow. Once he's treated, my father will. Tomorrow's too late. The man cut her off, moving closer. Fortunately, there are other ways a pretty thing like you could settle accounts. Before Zach could reconsider, he found himself stepping into the alley. That's enough. For heads turned in his direction. The woman's eyes widened, striking blue eyes that momentarily caught him off guard with their intensity. This ain't your business, stranger, the bearded man snarled. Unless you're looking to pay the lady's debts yourself? Zach kept his voice level. I'm looking to prevent 3 men from making a terrible mistake. One that might end with them in pine boxes. The smallest of the 3 men, rat-faced and nervous, tugged at his companion's sleeve. Jed, look at his gun belt. That's not a display piece. Jed's eyes narrowed as he assessed Zach more carefully. This debt will be settled one way or another. Then make it another, Zach replied, his hand still resting near his revolver. Now, a tense moment passed before Jed spat on the ground. We'll be seeing you again, Miss Riley. Count on it. He jerked his head toward his companions, and the 3 retreated down the alley, casting venomous glances over their shoulders. When they disappeared around the corner, the woman released a shaky breath. Thank you, sir, she said, smoothing down her simple but elegant blue dress. Though I fear you've made enemies on my account. Now that danger had passed, Zach took a proper look at her. She was perhaps 22, with golden blonde hair partially contained in a practical upswept style, tendrils escaping to frame a face of remarkable beauty. Not the painted, artificial beauty found in saloon girls, but something genuine that seemed to emanate from within. Her dress, though well-made, showed signs of many careful mendings, the mark of genteel poverty. They seemed like the type worth having as enemies, Zach replied. Are you hurt, miss? Delilah Riley, she provided, extending her hand as if they'd met at a social gathering rather than a threatened assault. And no, I'm not hurt, thanks to your timely intervention. Zach hesitated before taking her offered hand briefly. Zachary Elkins. Just passing through. Well, Mr. Elkins, passing through or not, you've done me a great service. Her blue eyes held his with surprising steadiness. Those men work for Edmund Tanner. He loaned my father money for our farm when the bank wouldn't, and now that my father is ill, Tanner's calling in the debt, Zach finished for her. He'd seen this scenario play out across the territories, predatory lenders targeting vulnerable homesteaders, then taking everything when hardship inevitably struck. Delilah nodded. The doctor arrives tomorrow. If he can help my father recover, we can harvest our wheat and pay what we owe. If not, she trailed off, her momentary vulnerability quickly masked by renewed determination. But I won't trouble you with our problems. You've done enough already. Something about her quiet dignity stirred Zach uncomfortably. Where's your farm? 3 miles east. I should be getting back. My father shouldn't be alone long in his condition. She paused. Mr. Elkins, Tanner's men won't forget this interaction. If you're staying in town, you should be careful. I can handle myself, Zach assured her, already questioning why he'd intervened at all. This was exactly the type of entanglement he avoided. Delilah studied him with those remarkable eyes. I believe you can. She hesitated. If you'll excuse my boldness, would you consider escorting me back to our farm? I walked into town for supplies, but after this encounter, every instinct told Zach to refuse. He had business to conduct, a room to secure before they filled up. The woman's problems weren't his concern. Let me see about a horse from the livery, he heard himself saying instead. We'll get you home before dark. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden, brilliant, and somehow transformative of everything it touched. Thank you, Mr. Elkins. I won't forget this kindness. As they walked back toward the main street, Zach maintained a proper distance between them, aware of watching eyes from shop windows and porches. He'd done his good deed for the day. He'd see her safely home, then return to town and his own affairs. Nothing more. He couldn't have known that this simple act of decency would shatter the careful isolation he'd built around himself, or that the woman walking beside him would come to challenge everything he believed about survival on the frontier. The fading light painted the rolling wheat fields in gold as Zach and Delilah approached the Riley farm. The modest homestead consisted of a small but well-maintained cabin, a barn that needed repair, and approximately 40 acres of wheat nearing harvest. A thin plume of smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. It's not much, Delilah said, noting his appraisal, but it's home. My father built it with his own hands after my mother died. We came west from Pennsylvania 5 years ago. Zach nodded, recognizing the pride in her voice. Many who ventured west failed within the first year, unable to withstand the harsh realities of frontier life. That the Rileys had survived 5 years, even reaching the point of having a successful crop, spoke to their determination. You've done well, he said simply. Good land. Thank you. We've worked hard. She paused as they neared the cabin. My father, His illness makes him confused sometimes. He may not understand who you are. I'll wait outside, Zach offered, suddenly uncomfortable with the intimacy of entering their home. Delilah shook her head. Please, come in. I insist on offering you coffee at least, before your ride back to town. The cabin's interior was modest, but meticulously clean. A curtained alcove concealed what Zach assumed was a bed, while the main room contained a table, 2 chairs, a small stove, and shelves holding books, an unusual luxury on the frontier. A frail, gray-haired man lay on a cot near the stove, his labored breathing audible in the quiet room. Papa, Delilah said gently, touching his forehead. I'm back. Did Mrs. Henderson stop by with the broth? The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing the same striking blue as his daughter's, though clouded with illness. Delilah? There was a woman, yes. Broth. His gaze shifted to Zach, sudden alarm crossing his features. Who's this man? Has Tanner sent another of his thugs? No, Papa, she soothed. This is Mr. Elkins. He helped me in town when Tanner's men were being difficult. He escorted me home safely. The old man studied Zach with surprising sharpness. Tanner's men bothered you? It's handled, Papa. The doctor comes tomorrow. Everything will be fine. Delilah busied herself at the stove. Mr. Elkins, please sit. The coffee will be ready shortly. Zach remained standing, hat in hand. Mr. Riley, your daughter showed considerable courage today. Riley's gaze softened. She's like her mother that way. Too brave for her own good sometimes. A coughing fit seized him, and Delilah rushed to his side with a cup of water. While she attended to her father, Zach noticed a rifle mounted above the door, old but well-maintained, and a small stack of papers on the table that appeared to be legal documents. The bold heading on the topmost paper read, Notice of Foreclosure. The doctor from Helena is expensive, Riley explained, catching Zach's glance at the papers. But Delilah insists he can help where the local physician couldn't. He's the best in the territory, Papa, Delilah said, returning to the stove. Dr. Maxwell has treated this fever before. Zach accepted the cup of coffee she offered, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange. Something in her gaze, a mixture of pride and quiet desperation, stirred an unwelcome empathy in him. What's your business in Silver Creek, Mr. Elkins? Riley asked. Selling cattle. I have a small spread north of here. A cowman. Interest flickered in the old man's eyes. Ever consider wheat? This soil's perfect for it. George, Delilah chided gently. Not everyone wants to farm. Just making conversation, daughter. Riley studied Zach. You have a capable look about you, Mr. Elkins. A man who knows his own mind. Papa believes he can judge a person's character at first glance, Delilah explained, a fond exasperation in her voice. And I'm rarely wrong, Riley insisted. Another coughing fit racked his body. Delilah moved to help him, but the old man waved her away. I'm fine. You two talk. Nice to hear young voices. As they sat at the small table, Zach found himself drawn into conversation more easily than he'd expected. Delilah spoke of their journey west, the harsh first winter, and their gradual establishment of the farm. Her face animated with quiet passion when she described her hopes for the harvest and her father's recovery. And you, Mr. Elkins? She eventually asked. What brought you to Montana? Zach hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his story. Opportunity. Land was available. Just like that, she pressed gently. No family. No past before Montana. Nothing worth mentioning. His tone made it clear the subject was closed. Something in her expression, not pity, but a kind of recognition, made him uncomfortable. As if she saw beneath his terse answers to the truth he kept buried. I should return to town, he said abruptly, rising from his chair. It'll be dark soon. Disappointment flickered briefly across her face before she composed herself. Of course. Thank you again for your help today, Mr. Elkins. At the door, Zach hesitated. The men from town, they might return. We'll manage, she said with quiet dignity. We always have. Zach glanced at the rifle above the door, then at the ill man on the cot. His jaw tightened. I'll be staying at the Silver Creek Hotel tonight. If there's trouble. There won't be, she assured him, though uncertainty shadowed her eyes. The doctor arrives tomorrow. Once Papa is better, we can harvest and pay Tanner what we owe. As Zach mounted his borrowed horse, Delilah stood in the doorway, the last rays of sunset illuminating her golden hair. For a moment, she seemed to embody everything he had denied himself, home, connection, purpose beyond mere survival. "Godspeed, Mr. Elkins," she called as he turned the horse toward town. He raised his hand in acknowledgement, but didn't look back. The growing darkness provided cover for the unfamiliar emotions stirring within him. Concern for strangers, an inexplicable reluctance to return to town, and the lingering impression of blue eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed defenses. By the time he reached Silver Creek, Zach had convinced himself that he'd fulfilled his obligation. The Rileys' problems were their own, just as his were his alone. That was the way of the frontier, each person fighting their own battles, surviving by their own strength. Yet as he secured a room at the hotel, his thoughts kept returning to the small homestead and its inhabitants, to the quiet courage of a daughter fighting for her father's life, to the first real conversation he'd had in years that wasn't about cattle prices or weather. Foolishness, he muttered to himself as he lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. Their problems aren't yours. But sleep eluded him, and somewhere in the darkness, his certainty began to waver. Dawn broke with unusual clarity the following morning, the rising sun burning away the mist that typically shrouded the mountains. Zach had risen before first light, his restless night driving him to the hotel's small dining room for strong coffee. "Quite the entrance you made yesterday," remarked the hotel proprietor as he refilled Zach's cup. "Not many would stand against Tanner's boys." Zach frowned. Word travels fast. "Small town," the man shrugged. "Folks are talking about the handsome stranger defending Delilah Riley. She's well liked here, despite her father's debts." "I was just passing through," Zach replied curtly. "Still am." The proprietor gave him a knowing look. "Sure. Though if you're planning to sell those cattle today, you should know Tanner controls most of the buyers hereabouts. After yesterday, he might make things difficult." Zach's jaw tightened. Another complication he didn't need. Appreciate the warning. After breakfast, he made his way to the general store to purchase the supplies he needed. The shopkeeper, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted him with unusual warmth. "Mr. Elkins, isn't it? What can I help you with today?" As Zach listed his requirements, a sudden commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices carried through the open door, one of them female and distressed. With a sinking feeling, Zach moved to the entrance. Delilah Riley stood in the middle of the street, confronting a well-dressed man flanked by the three troublemakers from the previous day. Her face was pale but determined as she clutched a letter in her hand. "The agreement was for the full amount by the harvest, Mr. Tanner," she was saying. "That's still 2 weeks away." "Circumstances change, Miss Riley," replied the well-dressed man. "Tanner, presumably." His voice carried the smooth cadence of practiced authority. "I have expenses of my own to consider." "The doctor is waiting at our farm right now," Delilah pleaded. "If you'll just allow us until the end of next week. Your father has been ill for months." Tanner cut her off. "Another doctor won't change that. I've been patient, but business is business." Before he could consider the wisdom of his actions, Zach found himself walking toward the confrontation. Tanner noticed his approach first, eyes narrowing in recognition. "Mr. Elkins." Tanner greeted him with false cordiality. "I understand you took an interest in my business affairs yesterday." "Seemed more like harassment than business," Zach replied evenly. Delilah's eyes widened at his appearance. "Mr. Elkins, please, this doesn't concern you. When 3 men corner a woman in an alley, it concerns any decent person," Zach said, his gaze not leaving Tanner. "What exactly is the nature of this debt, Mr. Tanner?" Tanner's smile didn't reach his eyes. $1,000, plus interest. A generous loan to save the Riley farm after last year's partial crop failure. Zach kept his expression neutral despite his surprise at the amount. It was a substantial sum for a small farm. "And the collateral?" "The farm itself, naturally," Tanner replied. "Now due for collection, I'm afraid." Delilah's voice trembled slightly. "My father is being treated right now. If he recovers, we can bring in the harvest." "The terms were clear," Tanner interrupted. "I've already been more than accommodating." A small crowd had gathered to watch the confrontation. From their expressions, Zach could see divided sympathies, some clearly pitying Delilah, others nodding in agreement with Tanner's position. "How much has been repaid?" Zach asked. $400 over the past year," Delilah answered before Tanner could speak. "With the harvest, we could pay another $500. "That leaves you considerably short," Tanner observed smoothly. Unless you've reconsidered my alternative arrangement. The implication was clear, and Zach's hand instinctively moved closer to his gun. What alternative arrangement? Tanner's smile broadened. Miss Riley could come work at my establishment. As a hostess, of course. The debt would be considered paid in full after 2 years of service. Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Everyone understood what hostess meant in Tanner's saloon. Delilah's face flushed with humiliation and anger. I would rather lose everything. That can be arranged as well, Tanner replied coldly. My men will escort you back to your farm. You have until sundown to collect your belongings. The property and all improvements thereupon become mine at that time. And if the remaining debt was paid? Zach heard himself ask, even as his mind screamed warnings about involving himself further. All eyes turned to him in surprise. Tanner recovered first. The note would be satisfied, naturally. But we're talking about $600, Mr. Elkins. Not the kind of money most cowboys carry in their pockets. Zach maintained a neutral expression. I'll need to visit the bank. And I'll want the loan document transferred to me. Mr. Elkins. Delilah gasped. You can't possibly. A business transaction, Zach interrupted, his eyes still on Tanner. Nothing more. Do we have an agreement? Tanner studied him with calculated interest. The bank won't be open for another hour. How do I know you're good for it? My cattle herd arrives this afternoon. 20 head of prime beef cattle that I intended to sell here. They're worth more than $600. After a long moment, Tanner nodded. Very well. Meet me at my office at 10 o'clock with the money. Bring Miss Riley to witness the transfer. He turned to Delilah. It seems you've found yourself a guardian angel, my dear. I wonder what price he'll extract for his generosity. With that parting insinuation, Tanner and his men departed, leaving Zach and Delilah standing in the middle of the street as the crowd began to disperse. Why would you do this? Delilah asked when they were relatively alone. Her blue eyes searched his face with bewildered intensity. You don't even know us. Zach struggled to answer. He barely understood his own actions. It's a business decision, he said finally. Your farm will produce enough to repay me after the harvest. With interest. Disbelief colored her expression. A business decision? To risk $600 on strangers. Consider it an investment in wheat, he replied, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. But there will be terms. I'll expect repayment by the end of harvest, with 10% interest. Her chin lifted slightly. We repay our debts, Mr. Elkins. Every penny. Good. Then it's settled. He glanced around, aware of lingering onlookers. You should return to your father and the doctor. I'll handle Tanner. I'll come with you to his office, she insisted. I need to see this transaction completed. To know it's real. As they walked toward the bank to wait for its opening, Zach fought against the growing realization that his impulsive decision had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the woman walking beside him. With her courage, her devotion to her father, and something in her eyes that had recognized the loneliness he worked so hard to conceal. $600. Nearly every cent he had saved over the past 2 years of backbreaking work. For strangers, for blue eyes, and a farm he'd never see the profits from. You're making a mistake, he told himself silently. But for the first time in years, his actions didn't feel like a mistake at all. They felt right in a way nothing had since he'd lost his family's ranch. And that realization was the most disturbing of all. The next 2 weeks unfolded in ways Zach could never have anticipated. After completing the transaction with Tanner, the man's smug certainty that Zach had been manipulated into a losing proposition still rankling. Zach had intended to sell his cattle and move on. Instead, he found himself drawn into the Riley farm's desperate race against time. Dr. Maxwell had diagnosed George Riley with pneumonia complicated by exhaustion. The treatment would work, he assured them, but recovery would take weeks. Weeks the small farm didn't have with harvest approaching. I'll hire help, Delilah had insisted when the doctor departed, leaving various medicines and strict instructions for care. There must be men in town willing to work for harvest wages. Tanner will have poisoned that well, Zach found himself saying. No one will risk crossing him for a few days' work. Her face had fallen then, the brave front momentarily cracking to reveal the exhaustion and fear beneath. Then I'll harvest it myself, acre by acre if necessary. That night, as Zach prepared to return to town, something stopped him at the cabin door. The image of Delilah struggling alone to save her wheat, her father's life hanging in the balance, her future mortgaged now to him instead of Tanner. It stuck in his throat like a fishbone. I have experience with wheat harvest, he said abruptly. From before Montana. I could stay a few days. Help get things started. The relief and gratitude that flooded her face had made something twist in his chest. I can pay you from the harvest proceeds, she began. Apply it to your debt, he interrupted. I'm not looking for wages. That had been 15 days ago. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Zach straightened from his work on the harvester, wiping sweat from his brow. Over 2/3 of the wheat stood harvested, the golden grain safely stored for transport to market. His cattle had been sold at a neighboring town for a fair price, the money secured in Silver Creek's bank under his name. And George Riley was sitting up in bed today, color returning to his face as he sipped the broth Delilah had prepared. You've saved us, Delilah said quietly, appearing at Zach's side with a dipper of water. Both the farm and my father. Zach accepted the water, careful not to let their fingers touch. The past 2 weeks had created a dangerous familiarity between them. Shared meals at the small table, long discussions as they worked side by side in the fields, her voice reading aloud from one of her books as he repaired the barn roof at dusk. You would have managed, he replied, his voice rougher than intended. No, she said simply. We wouldn't have. The farm would be Tanner's, and I would either be destitute or... She didn't complete the thought. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. It's not charity, he reminded her, clinging to the pretense that had allowed him to justify his actions. You'll repay the loan. Delilah studied him, her head tilted slightly. In the golden afternoon light, with wisps of blonde hair escaping her practical braid and her blue dress smudged with the dust of honest work, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Why do you do that? She asked. Do what? Pretend this is merely a financial arrangement. That you care nothing for what happens to us. Zach looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. Caring complicates things. Gets people hurt. Not caring hurts more, she countered softly. I've watched you these past weeks, Zachary Elkins. You've worked yourself to exhaustion for this farm. You've sat with my father, talking about cattle and weather when he couldn't sleep. You rebuilt our barn door and fixed the roof. Those aren't the actions of a man concerned only with loan repayment. Her words cut too close to truths he wasn't ready to acknowledge. I should check the north field before dark, he said, turning away. The last section should be ready tomorrow. Zach, she called after him, the first time she'd used the familiar form of his name. You can't outrun yourself forever. He kept walking, his strides long and purposeful, trying to outdistance not her words but the growing realization that she was right. Something was changing inside him, walls crumbling that he'd spent years carefully building. The small cemetery on the hill overlooking the farm caught his eye. 2 crosses stood sentinel there. Markers Delilah had explained were for her mother and younger brother, both lost to fever during their first winter in Montana. Without conscious decision, Zach found himself climbing the gentle slope. The crosses were simple but well-maintained, with late summer wildflowers planted around their bases. He removed his hat as he approached, a gesture of respect instilled by his own mother long ago. She's something special, isn't she? Came a voice from behind him. Zach turned to find George Riley making his way slowly up the hill, leaning heavily on a walking stick. The older man's recovery had been steady but incomplete. He could move around the cabin and yard now, but remained too weak for field work. You shouldn't be exerting yourself, Zach admonished, moving to offer support. Riley waved him off. Been cooped up too long. Needed some air and perspective. He gestured toward the crosses. Elizabeth and Thomas. They watch over us. Over Delilah especially. An uncomfortable silence fell between them until Riley spoke again. You're leaving soon. It wasn't a question. Zach nodded anyway. The harvest will be completed tomorrow. The buyer from Helena arrives the day after. Once you have your payment, my business here is concluded. Business, Riley echoed thoughtfully. Is that what you call it? Zach's jaw tightened. The loan will be repaid in full, with interest as agreed. I'm not talking about money, son. The older man's blue eyes, so like his daughter's, fixed on Zach with disconcerting perception. I'm talking about what happens after you ride away from here. I return to my ranch, Zach replied stiffly. Life continues. Riley sighed, looking out over the landscape. When Elizabeth died, I wanted to die too. The only thing that kept me going was Delilah and Thomas. Then we lost Thomas, And it was just the two of us against everything this harsh country could throw at us. He paused. I built walls then, walls to keep out more pain, more loss. I recognized the technique. Zach remained silent, uncomfortable with the parallel being drawn. Walls keep out pain, Riley continued. But they also keep out joy, connection, love. I almost forgot that. Then I saw how my daughter looked at you, and how you looked at her when you thought no one was watching. Mr. Riley, let me finish, son. I don't have the strength for lengthy speeches these days. The older man turned to face him fully. Something happened to you. Something that taught you it was safer to be alone. I don't need to know what it was. But I know this. Delilah sees in you what I saw in her mother. A partner worthy of building a life with. Heat rose in Zach's face. I'm not the man you think I am. I'm not. Whole enough for someone like her. Riley's weathered face softened. None of us are whole out here. We're all broken by this land in some way. The secret is finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. He gestured toward the graves. Elizabeth taught me that. I was fortunate to have 18 years with her before this country took her from me. Not a day passes that I don't miss her, but I wouldn't trade the pain of losing her for never having loved her at all. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, the cabin's windows glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney. A picture of home that Zach had convinced himself he neither wanted nor deserved. You have feelings for my daughter, Riley stated simply. And unless I'm greatly mistaken, she returns them. What you do with that truth is your choice. But consider this. Someday you'll be looking back on your life, and the regrets that will haunt you most are the chances you didn't take. With that, the older man began his careful descent back toward the cabin, leaving Zach alone with the crosses, the sunset, and thoughts he could no longer outrun. That night, as Zach lay in the barn loft where he'd been sleeping, he stared at the roof beams and finally confronted the truth. He was falling in love with Delilah Riley. Perhaps had been since the moment she'd stood defiant in that alley, courage outshining fear. The realization terrified him more than any gunslinger or wild animal ever had. Loving meant risking loss, risking betrayal, opening himself to the same devastation that had nearly destroyed him when his family's ranch was taken through treachery and violence. Yet for the first time in 6 years, the thought of returning to his solitary existence filled him not with comfort, but with a hollowness that seemed unbearable. His small ranch, once his sanctuary, now appeared in his mind as it truly was. Empty rooms, silent meals, purposeless work leading nowhere. Fool, he whispered to himself in the darkness. You've let her in. Tomorrow he would finish the harvest. The day after, the buyer would come, money would change hands, debts would be settled. And then he would have no reason to stay. No excuse to linger near blue eyes that saw too much, near hands that worked with both strength and tenderness, near a voice that had begun to populate his dreams. Sleep eluded him until the small hours of the morning, when exhaustion finally claimed him. He dreamed of wheat fields burning, of Delilah calling his name as he rode away, of returning to find the farm abandoned, 2 fresh crosses on the hillside. He woke with the first light, the dream's desolation clinging to him like a shroud. The final day of harvest dawned clear and cool, a hint of autumn touching the air. Zach and Delilah worked in companionable silence, each aware that their time together was drawing to a close, but neither willing to acknowledge it directly. By mid-afternoon, the last of the wheat had been cut, bundled, and stored. Zach dismounted from the harvester, surveying their work with satisfaction. The Riley farm had yielded well, enough to repay his loan with interest and leave a comfortable margin for winter preparations. We did it, Delilah said, her face glowing with triumph and exertion as she joined him. Papa says it's our best harvest yet. The quality is exceptional, Zach agreed. You'll get top price tomorrow. A shadow crossed her face at the mention of tomorrow. Yes, and then our business will be concluded. The word business hung between them, hollow and insufficient for what had developed over these weeks. Delilah, Zach began, uncertain what he intended to say, but knowing silence was no longer possible. A shout from the road interrupted him. They turned to see a rider approaching at speed. Peterson from the livery stable in town, his horse lathered with exertion. Miss Riley. Elkins, he called as he drew closer. Trouble coming. They hurried to meet him as he reined in his horse. What's happened? Zach demanded. Peterson dismounted, breathing heavily. Tanner's on his way with his men. 6 of them, all armed. He's claiming fraud in your loan transfer. That's absurd, Delilah protested. The transfer was legal and witnessed. He says Elkins used cattle he didn't rightfully own as collateral for the bank draft, Peterson explained. Claims they were stolen from Wyoming territory. Ice formed in Zach's veins. The past he'd outrun for 6 years had finally caught up to him. That's a lie, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Delilah looked between the 2 men, confusion clear on her face. Zach, how long do we have? He asked Peterson, ignoring her question. An hour, maybe less. They were gathering when I slipped out of town. The older man glanced at Delilah. They're not coming for a friendly discussion, Miss Riley. Tanner means to take the farm and deal with Elkins permanently. Sheriff's conveniently out of town until tomorrow. Zach's mind raced through options, none of them good. Delilah, gather what you can carry. You and your father need to leave. Now. Leave? This is our home. Her eyes searched his face. And what does he mean about stolen cattle? Zach, what aren't you telling me? The moment he'd dreaded had arrived. The truth he'd hidden from everyone, including himself, laid bare by circumstance. There's no time to explain everything. Yes, there was trouble in Wyoming. No, the cattle weren't stolen. They were mine, legitimately. But Tanner has connections there. He's found something he can use. Use for what? She demanded. To discredit me. To void our loan agreement. To take your farm legally. He gripped her shoulders. Delilah, please. You have to trust me. If Tanner arrives with his men and finds us here, blood will be shed. Her eyes widened in understanding. He means to kill you. And claim your farm when the dust settles, Zach confirmed grimly. Peterson, can you take them to Helena? They'll be safe there until this is sorted out. The livery owner nodded. My wagon's at the edge of the property. We can be on the road in 20 minutes. No, Delilah said firmly, stepping back from Zach's grip. I will not be driven from my home by threats and lies. This farm is all we have. Delilah, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, she interrupted, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. Running means losing everything. If Tanner's claims are false, we can fight them legally. The law moves slowly, Peterson interjected. Bullets move fast. A heavy silence fell between them. Zach looked toward the cabin where George Riley sat on the porch, watching their interaction with concern. Then I'll leave, Zach said finally. If I'm gone when Tanner arrives, he'll have no immediate target. That will buy you time to seek proper legal help in Helena. And you'll be branded a criminal, Delilah countered. A rustler who fled rather than face charges. Is that the truth, Zachary? Are you a thief? The question struck him like a physical blow. No, he answered, meeting her gaze directly. But there are complications to my past that Tanner has twisted to his advantage. Then tell me, she pleaded. Make me understand what we're facing. Time was running out, but Zach recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. She wouldn't flee without answers. 6 years ago, I had a partner in Wyoming, a man I trusted with my life and my family's ranch, he began, the words coming rapidly. While I was away driving cattle to market, he forged documents transferring our property to a land company. When I returned and discovered the theft, I confronted him. There was a fight. He drew on me. Zach's hand unconsciously touched the scar along his jawline. I survived. He didn't. Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. Self-defense. The law would have seen it that way, but his brother was the county judge. I fled with what cattle I could gather. Cattle that were rightfully mine, but that his brother claimed belonged to the estate. I've been rebuilding ever since, keeping clear of Wyoming and anyone connected to it. And somehow Tanner discovered this connection, she concluded. Zach nodded grimly. He must have contacts in Wyoming. When I interfered with his plans for you and your farm, he started digging. So if you stay and face these accusations, best case, I'm arrested and sent to Wyoming for trial before a corrupt judge, Zach finished for her. Worst case, Tanner's men ensure I never make it to trial. Peterson, who had been scanning the road anxiously, interrupted. Whatever you're deciding, decide quickly. Dust on the horizon. Riders coming. Delilah's face set with determination. Peterson, ride to the Henderson farm. They have 3 sons, all good with rifles. Tell them what's happening. That's still only 4 against 7, Zach protested. And Henderson's boys are barely men. 5, came George Riley's voice as he approached from the cabin, rifle in hand. I can still shoot. 6, Delilah corrected, moving toward the cabin. I'm quite capable with Papa's shotgun. Zach caught her arm. Delilah, this isn't your fight. She turned to face him fully, her blue eyes fierce with emotion. It became my fight the moment you stood between me and Tanner's men in that alley. It became my fight when you risked everything to save our farm. It became my fight when I fell in love with you. The declaration hung in the air between them, as startling and bright as a shooting star. For a moment, Zach couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the words she'd just spoken. You don't know what you're saying, he managed finally. You can't love me. You don't even know me. I know enough, she replied simply. I know you're a man who would work himself to exhaustion for strangers, who treats my father with dignity and respect, who rebuilt our barn and fixed our roof and never once asked for gratitude. I know that when you look at me, your eyes never leave mine, as if you're looking at my soul, not my face. Peterson cleared his throat awkwardly. I'll, go fetch the Hendersons, he said, mounting his horse. Try not to get yourselves killed before I return. As he galloped away, Zach found himself at a crossroads more significant than any he'd faced in 6 years of running. The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger. Tanner and his men would arrive within 20 minutes. Delilah, he said softly, if I stay, there will be violence. Men may die, and even if we prevail today, my past won't simply disappear. There will always be someone like Tanner looking to use it against me, against us. Then we face it together, she said with quiet certainty. I'm not asking you to fight alone anymore, Zach. I'm asking you to let us stand with you. From the cabin, George Riley called. The choice is yours, son. But remember what I said about regrets. The approaching riders were now visible on the road, 7 men, armed and determined. In that moment, Zach knew with absolute clarity that he couldn't run again. Not from Tanner, not from his past, and certainly not from the woman before him who had somehow breached all his defenses. Get your shotgun, he told Delilah, and tell your father to take position by the north window. I'll meet them in the yard. Relief and determination transformed her face. She reached up impulsively, pressing her lips to his in a brief but fervent kiss. Be careful, she whispered before hurrying to the cabin. Zach touched his fingers to his lips, the ghost of her kiss lingering as he watched her go. Then he checked his revolver, squared his shoulders, and walked to the center of the yard to await Tanner's arrival. The confrontation that followed would be retold in Silver Creek for years to come. How Zachary Elkins stood alone in the yard as 7 armed men rode in. How Tanner demanded the farm, claiming Elkins was a murderer and cattle thief from Wyoming. How Delilah Riley emerged from the cabin with a shotgun, followed by her father with his rifle. How, at the crucial moment when violence seemed inevitable, Peterson returned with not just the 3 Henderson boys, but a dozen other farmers from the surrounding area, all armed, all standing firm against Tanner's attempt to seize another family's land. Faced with overwhelming opposition, Tanner had been forced to retreat, his threats of legal action rendered hollow by the community's united front and by the arrival, the following day, of the territorial marshal who had been summoned by telegraph from Helena. The marshal, upon reviewing the full facts of Zach's case in Wyoming, including evidence of the forged documents that George Riley, once a lawyer in Pennsylvania, helped uncover, declared that no legitimate charges existed against Zachary Elkins. The matter of his partner's death had been ruled self-defense years ago. The judge's attempts to pursue further action deemed harassment and officially closed. With his past finally resolved and his name cleared, Zach found himself standing once again on the porch of the Riley farm as autumn painted the surrounding landscape in reds and golds. The wheat harvest had been sold for an excellent price, the loan repaid in full, and Tanner's influence in Silver Creek significantly diminished by his failed attempt to seize the farm through intimidation. You're leaving, Delilah said, joining him on the porch. It wasn't a question. My ranch needs attention, he replied, turning to face her. I've neglected it too long. Disappointment shadowed her features before she composed herself. Of course, you have responsibilities there. Zach studied her in the soft evening light, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the exact shade of blue in her eyes, the way loose strands of golden hair framed her face. I thought, he began carefully, that I might need help managing a larger operation. Her gaze lifted to his, confusion giving way to cautious hope. What are you saying? I'm saying that I sold 20 acres of my land yesterday. Good grazing land with water access. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. I'm saying that I had this made in Helena while the marshal was reviewing my case. From the pouch, he withdrew a simple gold ring with a small sapphire that caught the fading sunlight. I'm saying that if a certain wheat farmer and her father were interested in diversifying into cattle, I know just the place. A place that needs a woman's touch. A place that's been empty too long. Delilah's eyes widened, her hand rising to her mouth. Zach, I love you, Delilah Riley, he said, the words feeling both foreign and completely natural on his tongue. I tried not to. God knows I tried. But you were right. When I look at you, I see your soul. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever encountered. Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she reached for the ring with trembling fingers. Are you certain? Your independence means so much to you. Zach took her hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. What I'm certain of is that independence without you feels hollow now. That the walls I built to keep out pain were keeping out everything worth living for. He knelt before her, still holding her hand. Delilah Riley, will you marry me? Will you help me build something that matters? Yes, she whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, yes, Zachary Elkins. I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, George Riley appeared in the doorway behind them, his face alight with approval. About time, the older man commented dryly. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar together. Delilah laughed through her tears, the sound washing over Zach like a benediction. As he rose to his feet, she stepped into his embrace, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. You realize this means combining our farms, she murmured against his chest. Your cattle and our wheat. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, he replied, his arms tightening around her. But I've learned that some things are worth fighting for, worth changing for. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the farm in the golden light of evening. From this vantage point, Zach could see both the wheat fields they'd harvested together and the distant mountains that separated them from his ranch. No longer barriers, but simply terrain to be traversed on their journey forward. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Zachary Elkins held the woman he loved and felt, for the first time in 6 years, that he had truly come home.